uitați, vă rog, uitați prima toamnă.
Hello, chai, cafea. Hai cu zahăr? Da, ce sunt cules de zahăr? Regina. Dacă s-au Mirela, Erika, vrei? Domnul
Aici, văd că vine acum acolo iar. De cafea, dacă da...
Da, mai neluată. Mulțumesc. Cu plăcere. Da,
Cam mai... Bine să ne mine afară.
Și ei.
Bine să ne mine afară.
Și ei. Și ei.
Department is open for business. Just bring me the kickbacks. If the whiskey ring people had said that, that's the world we're living in now. And we have to think about new structures and new new forms of anti-corruption response to deal with the pride.
Greg, I think you were going to respond.
So yeah, and I'm sympathetic to all that. I think that this is kind of the intersection of two broad problems, which I've already touched on. But one is an increasing cultural understanding that if it's not illegal, it's not wrong, which just wildly misunderstands the purpose of criminal law and decent civilization. So there's that. And then there is this, again, this thinking that we've all talked about with if our side does it, it can't be wrong. Or maybe it's a little bit wrong, but the other side is so bad that we have to tolerate this to defeat them. Sometimes I think about what's another historical anecdote. I say we've got a problem of Fourth Crusade thinking. And the Fourth Crusade was the crusade that set out to save the Christian East and wound up running into a bunch of problems and made a bunch of compromises and sacked Constantinople and destroyed the Christian East. All because they were sure that they were right, and they had to excuse every little deviation along the way to get to that final end. And we're approaching our politics like that, and it's extremely dangerous. And so when this flows into this problem of corruption and not strictly illegal wrongs, it's really, really toxic. And then just to say, on the stepping away from the kind of toxic, tawdry corruption of the Trump administration, it's a problem, for example, when we had President Obama say, how many times was it that he didn't have the power to legalize illegal aliens with an executive order, that he wasn't a king, couldn't do it a dozen times, 24 times, and then just did it to not any criticism from the left? You should be able to believe in immigration legalization and see that is a problem.
But I would just point out that Washington, D.C. is the original earmark. Papa Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, they were land speculators. They had a lot of land. They bought a lot of land, and they wanted Philly. They didn't like Philly. Philly was too far away, and it was too far away from their land in the Ohio country. So this has been with us for a long time. Some of our biggest heroes, and I'm not suggesting that Trump, and I would say I'm not suggesting Trump is George Washington by any means. But what I'm saying is that we have to take a step back and think not so much about outcomes as about the activity in which we're participating, how to safeguard the space where that activity occurs, and how to ensure that those structures and those institutions can last. And I think one of the things that is so bad about corruption, whatever kind we have, is that it undermines that space. It undermines that load-bearing wall in our political architecture, and it makes it impossible, because without that space, we're just back to doing what we did before the Constitution. We're back to basically trying to figure out who's going to rule. And in America, we don't have rulers. Majority doesn't rule. Minority doesn't rule. No one rules. That's the point of America.
I want to wrap, and I want to save time for each of our panels. We'll get to audience questions. So be thinking after this question, we'll start taking questions from the audience. But I want to finish with the Department of Justice. And the Attorney General, the Department of Justice, and the role of an Attorney General, because I think that has really become a prominent role in the cabinet of a president. It's become part of the popular discourse in a way that they're on both the left and the right. There's this sense that, lock her up, lock him up. Somebody's got to get in there and lock somebody up, or there's this sort of kind of mob mentality of set aside the justifications and the arguments for whether they should actually be locked up. There is this sort of political energy to kind of exact political vengeance on your enemy by locking them up. And a lot of it depends on and manifests itself in who the president appoints as the Attorney General. There's a lot of focus on, is the Attorney General going to be aggressive, or are they going to do the bidding of the president? Is the Department of Justice going to be independent? Should the Attorney General sort of be the head of their own fiefdom and sort of do their own thing and be completely separate from the president? Should the president not have any direction over the Department of Justice that sits under he or she? How do we think about that? I mean, it's a question of nuance, obviously, but our politics don't process it that way. And so I'm curious to get your thoughts. Maybe James, you want to start on that one, or?
Sure, and I'll be brief. I mean, this is a challenge of politics and law. I mean, somebody's got to control the Attorney General. I'd make him a ruler if no one did. Same with the Supreme Court. And so the question is, how do we set up a structure that helps to get good people in place and allows for a good back and forth, a good healthy disagreement. And when people overstep their bounds, you get impeached, or you tie your shoes the wrong way, you can impeach somebody. You know, I mean, that's the way we need to think. And yes, it is problematic if you have a president who says that, you know, I'm going to have a heavy thumb on the Attorney General of the Department of Justice. It's very problematic. We can all see that. It's equally problematic to have a president or a Congress that has no say in the Department of Justice, right? I mean, that's just the other side of the coin. And so I think we need to think about it. Politics and law, I mean, law is something that we make via politics, and ultimately we are sovereign, the people. We have a constitution that we, with our authority as sovereigns, gave power to the government. The government then uses that power to do what we want, and when they don't do something, then we change it. And the idea that somehow now the law is the sovereign, which I think is where we are today. The Supreme Court's the sovereign, they're the rulers, and then the law is the sovereign, and yeah, we can change it, but it's the law. Then I think you get, it's problematic, but on the other, from a different perspective. And there's that healthy medium, and that's why I'm really stressing here, it's an activity. It's not an outcome. It's an activity in which we participate as free citizens. We are all rulers, and we are ruled at the same time. But that is an adverbial activity. It requires a space. It requires people like you getting up and going about your business and then actually taking interest in things. You know, I mean, it's really important. But when we start thinking about outcomes and how do we secure certain outcomes, we're already down that kind of factory thinking road. And we are already undermining that space. And we're already beginning to rationalize the rules and break the rules when we need to. And you can't sustain a system like ours with that kind of mentality. And we haven't had that mentality for a very long time, but for the last like 30, 40 years, it's been slowly creeping in. And right now, when I look at American politics, I see that mentality everywhere. And it is terrifying because you cannot sustain this country with it.
Yeah, so I think one of the very sad things to watch over the last year and a bit has been watching the left and the liberal world turn on Merrick Garland. And you know, there's a lot of things I've said so far have been critical of the conservative world. I want to, at the risk of both sidesism, I do think that has been a very unfortunate look for the left. Merrick Garland came in promising to restore certain norms that had been done extreme violence in the Trump era. And I won't rehearse those episodes. He came in promising to look at cases based on their own merits, to respect the traditions of the department in cases that bringing and not bringing cases, and implicit in this was a promise to not give speeches about criticizing religious movements or secular movements, as his predecessor had done, not, you know, become a culture warrior. And that is exactly what he's done. He has, and I say this with some defensiveness. I mean, he's somebody I admire a great deal and have known for many years and have been close to. This is exactly what he's done. He has brought more than 700 cases against 1/6 participants and conspirators. They have not been unaggressive. And yet, to listen to the dialogue about this on the left, it actually sounds a bit like, to use Heath's example, it sounds a bit like a Trump rally with people chanting, "Lock her up." People are certain that they know all of the people who should have been indicted yet. Very rarely when they do this are they spelling out the statute and the evidence and the elements of that offense that may have been violated. And, you know, and again, this, I hate to keep harping on this, but this is the confidence game aspect of it. If we want a Justice Department that behaves under what we think of as the rule of law, not having the Justice Department indict people because we don't like them is a big part of that. And having the discipline of an indictment, requiring an indictment that actually specifies with provable evidence a violation of a known criminal law, that's an important value. And we have an attorney general who, whatever one's criticisms of the Justice Department and, individual cases that they've brought or not brought, and all of those are, legitimate subjects of discussion, you can agree with or disagree with. It is simply impossible to make the case that he has not, and the Justice Department has not been behaving according to its traditional norms. That is a very important thing that has changed in the last couple years. It has gone almost entirely unnoticed, and to the extent it has been noticed, it has been the subject of villainization on the part of much of the left and center left. And I just think it is worth taking a moment to appreciate, that one of the successes of the Biden administration is a restoration of the way that in a bipartisan fashion, people previously understood that the Justice Department should work. And so, I actually want to give a hat tip to the Attorney General and again say, hey, what does it say about us as a polity that our reaction to that is so frustrated?
And I just want to end on a note of optimism as well. And our system can withstand all of this stuff. I mean, this has been with us for a long time. Aaron Burr was prosecuted for insurrection and trying to break away the American West, back then, I guess, Louisiana. And John Marshall, in his opinion, he's like, just stop bringing this case. Like, it's a political vendetta. Thomas Jefferson, the Jeffersonian Republicans, the founders of our great nation that we lionize, were basically going after judges because they didn't like their rulings. In the 1920s, we all know J. Edgar Hoover. Well, we got to start in the Justice Department in the 1920s, the Palmer raids. Attorney General Palmer locking up people we don't agree with. Not only were they rounding up anybody that they suspected to be a communist, they were putting them on boats and shipping them over to Russia. Just get out of here, right? Locking them up, ship them out, right? So this has been with us for a while. I think the difference is, and it will be with us in the future, but the difference is back then we had a respect and a reverence for our political system. And that kind of behavior can't last long in a system like ours. It's when all sides begin to erode that system and say, well, we're going to do what you're doing just the other way because we're for justice and you're not. That's when you hit that kind of slippery slope that I hope we're not on now, but we have to embrace our system and the institutions for it to work. And the only thing we need is just take the fight to Congress, take it to elections, and just have it. That's the important thing.
I agree with all that. I mean, and this is a great place to end the discussion on because it pulls together a lot of what we've been talking about. Yes, people talk about an independent Justice Department. You don't want that either. The excessively politicized prosecutor is a problem, but a truly independent prosecutor is terrifying. So we try to combine these two roles. I mean, there has to be political choices made at the Justice Department. If nothing else, how to marshal resources, what to prioritize, or what an administration wants to focus on with the resources of DOJ. But you do not want a Justice Department that is picking enemies, political enemies. And how do we get there? Well, we get there through cultural and societal understanding of principles, of better civics, and then we work that through our system. We have a confirmation process which should put pressure on a president to nominate the type of person who can be trusted with this type of massive power and understand that their obligation is not just to the administration but also to the rule of law and the Constitution, someone who has some prudence about their responsibilities. And then you want a Congress that is empowered to conduct vigorous oversight of the Justice Department, and both parties make the mistake of eviscerating Congress's oversight powers when their guys are in the White House and their gals are at the Justice Department. And we need those tools. And ultimately, we do need the ability to have a resort to impeachment when it's called for.
Great. Thank you all for that. Okay, at this point, we will have, I think we will have aisle mics for the next panel. We have mics in the back that we'll hand you. If you have a question, raise your hand, and someone in the aisle will find you. David, you have a question here. We'll start here. Yeah, if you wanted to stand up and.
Thank you. David Stratton from Boston. Along Ben's lines that the rule of law works because we as citizens have faith in the system.
Sorry, maybe you started. Yeah, there you go.
That we as citizens have faith in the system. My question is, we were talking about the checks that the judiciary has on the executive and the legislature, that being basically the ability to declare something unconstitutional. Likewise, the legislature having a check on the executive by way of impeachment. When the Supreme Court rules something is simply unconstitutional, that's all that they can do. To enforce that, it depends on the competence of the executive and the legislative branch to enforce that. So my question is two-part. Number one, are we close to the point where we might experience an executive officer disregarding a Supreme Court decision? And secondly, have we reached the point where we can never expect a valid impeachment proceeding to be successful unless the Senate is dominated by senators of the opposing political party?
It's a great question. I think the first thing to keep in mind is judicial review is a very complex thing with regard to the President and Congress. In the Constitution, there's no question about it. The Supremacy Clause, Article 6, Clause 2, you apply, like in federalism in the states, in concurrent powers, judicial review is clear-cut. The framers understood it. They agreed on it. It was there. After that, with regard to the President and Congress, it's a little bit murky, and you have different theories like departmentalism, which is what basically Marbury v. Madison was, which is essentially we will declare this act unconstitutional only because it's telling us, or this part of the Judiciary Act, because it tells us how to use our power, and we get to choose how to use our power. If we say that under the separation of powers, the courts can tell the other branches what is right and wrong, what they can and can't do, well, that makes them a ruler. That makes them the absolute. I mean, it is incompatible with separation of powers. Now, the checks and balances is something that we put in there. It's from the kind of medieval notion of mixed government, and we installed it into our doctrine of separation of powers because Cromwell and the first founding of the 1780s told us that separation of powers on a pure basis doesn't work. So we gave the executive a veto, we gave the Congress some powers over the executive, but the judicial review part of it wasn't in that conversation. Now, that's how we decide it today, and that's how we understand it today, and that is all well and good, but it does present certain theoretical difficulties. Now, with regard to disregarding a ruling of the court, I mean, the court adjudicates disputes between parties. Fidelity to the rule of law is what translates that outcome to us all agreeing with it. We say, well, if I go through this process, I know that I'm going to end up in court and it's going to end out this way too. But the court doesn't write law unless Congress rewrites it. And, Andrew Jackson disregarded the court. In my experience, America has experienced all of these things in the past, and they weren't existential. What makes them existential is not the particular act in the moment, it's the overall way in which we're thinking about politics. And, and I would just say, you can't go near the court now. We're all basically judicial supremacists. The left doesn't like the court because Trump got 3 justices. So what do they say? Do we want to strip their jurisdiction? Completely legitimate. Do we want to get rid of a circuit? It's what the Jeffersonians did. Do we want to raise the number to grant cert? Do we want to take away their building? You can do a whole lot of things. No, we don't do any of that. What? We want to pack the court. Why? Because we want our rulers in there. And then I would assume that Republicans are probably the same way, which is you can't restrict the court because the court, that's dangerous. The court, that's politics intervening with law. But what we're saying is, no, that's why amend the Constitution? Why go through all this process? I'll just get my own judges on there and then we're going to rule. But the problem is, as you said, they don't have a lot of power. They're like the weakest of the 3 branches, and they're going to be the first one to go. So why on earth are all sides saying that's the bastion of liberalism or conservatism? That's the bastion of truth and justice, because I guarantee you, if things go south, that bastion's the first one to go. And they have neither force nor will. And so it's not about the courts, it's about our fidelity to politics. And we don't have that. And until we have it, we're kind of in trouble.
I would just add to that on the second question of whether we can expect the impeachment clause to be a sort of symbolic nullity unless you imagine a degree of domination of the Senate by one party. I think in the present environment, that's certainly correct. You know, the one caveat I would give to that is that American politics are pretty fluid, and I would not assume that it's one generation ago that Richard Nixon expected to lose a Senate trial and resigned, and I would not expect necessarily that the current moment is of highly partisan polarization is a permanent fixture. And I think, we go through periods which are more and less partisan, and we are in a period of particular partisan ferocity. But I wouldn't expect that would last forever. I'm not a forecaster, so I don't pretend to know how long it will last. But as long as it's the case, as long as we live in a world of party government, the impeachment clauses are not a particularly effective instrument.
And I'll just take, can I just take those two things backwards? First, impeachment. I think that's right, but I am pro-impeachment. I want more of it. And I think there's two things to know about impeachment that I always remind people. It's not just about the president. We haven't, but we should impeach cabinet officers almost routinely. I understand why.
Pull one out of the hat.
I understand why there's hesitancy to undo an election, which an impeachment does. So why not impeach cabinet officers responsible for the offending constitutional policies? We should do more of that. Second, impeachment isn't just about removal. It's about oversight, investigation, clearing the air. The founders thought this would be an opportunity to get public scandals fleshed out in front of the people. We've gotten away from that. We're just thinking about it as just removing a president. No, it's about so much more than that. So we could use a renaissance of the impeachment clauses. And one other thing on judicial review, I worry about the other side of that, although we should maybe worry about circumstances in which political branches will ignore the rulings of the court. I worry that the political branches think that everything's up to the courts these days and do things that they suspect are unconstitutional and just say, we'll see what the courts say about it, which is a tremendous abdication of their role.
We have another question, I think. Amanda, you had a question?
We've got it.
Oh, you got a question. Sorry. Yeah. Oh, great.
Thanks. Justin Pitcock from Nacogdoches, Texas. Thank you all for this panel. You did a great job of framing the direct line between corruption and confidence in the system and how corruption undermines that confidence. We're in this room because we want principles to become prominent and we want those principles to become policy. I think Heath touched on an important measure there, which is stock trading. As a recovering investment banker whose trades were scrutinized at 22 years old, or we don't expect the same from our elected officials. So my question is, what policies, what framework would you use to instill trust in the system? And I think stock trading is one, and then the political parties, the way that they're ingrained in our election systems, whether that be gerrymandering, whether that be the primary systems and their hold on that. What are some things that we could put into place to instill that trust again?
I'll take a crack at that. And it's an excellent question. And I'd like to refer to the recorded speech that we heard right before this panel. One of the really important things that Liz Cheney is doing is working in a bipartisan fashion to actually make clear that congressional subpoenas mean something. This sounds like an esoteric point, but one of the things that happened during the last 4 years was that you had one person after another simply stiff congressional oversight efforts, some of them partisan in character, a lot of them legitimate in character. And that sent a message of impunity. And for Congress, and I think Benny Thompson, the chair of the committee, and Liz Cheney, the vice chair, deserve just an enormous amount of credit for focusing in a very serious way, not merely on getting the answers to the questions they need answered, but on establishing the principle that they get the answers to the questions they need answered. And I think there is nothing like watching Congress, and I know that he is not the most popular man in the world, but I do want to bracket Adam Schiff as a counterexample to this, because the first impeachment investigation was enormously effective, notwithstanding the point I'm about to make. Watching Congress over a protracted period of time, simply unable to gather basic information, is completely demoralizing to the idea of oversight in government. And so watching Congress carefully and deliberatively and in a bipartisan fashion, and the participation of Representatives Cheney and Kinzinger in this is really a critical feature, and the way the Democrats have worked with them is a really important factor, and it's something we should all appreciate. Having that deliberative work done to reestablish the idea that when Congress investigates something, number one, it actually does it. It's not simply a series of speeches and yelling at witnesses. It's not, you know, Jim Jordan screaming at somebody with his sleeves, and, you know, and it's not the tweets that you send out about it. It's actually investigative work product. And number two, that it has the tools to do that investigative work product is, I think, a critical part of reestablishing confidence in the idea that we have government that works effectively and has the tools to work effectively.
I think we have one more.
Can I just weigh in real quick?
Yeah, sorry.
I mean, one, I think Adam Schiff has a phenomenal audible voice. I mean, you know, he should definitely has a career. As I was listening to the impeachment trial, I mean, I could definitely listen to him read like a good book. But look, I think to connect on both, you know, these 2 points here, Congress can't enact policy if no one takes Congress seriously. When Jim Jordan tried to use the power of the purse and conservatives to defund Obamacare, elites around the country scoffed at them and said that was illegitimate. James Madison says that's the best power of the purse, the most sacred power you can give a free people's representatives. Now we're told you can't shut the government down, you can't block judges from the left and the right, because that's just politics playing into it. You can't hold people, you can't obstruct, you can't do this, you can't do that, but we want really good policy. Well, of course people are going to ignore you. The administration's going to ignore you, right? We have Sherrod Brown on the floor. The banking committee doesn't show up to a hearing for the nominee to the Federal Reserve. Sherrod Brown's on the floor and says the equation is simple, do your job. Well, you know, what does that mean? He's saying, I want this nom, and you're not giving it to me, so I'm going to accuse you of not doing your job. Do you see what I'm talking about here? Like, it's about the power in not in the activity, not the outcome. And so if you want more robust rules, then applaud it when somebody stands up and puts a rider on an appropriations bill, even if you disagree with the policy. Applaud it when somebody tries to impeach somebody if you disagree with it. You can still oppose them in the process, but we should applaud the activity, because that activity is the point.
I think we have time for one more question in this one. Oh, great, Amanda.
Can you guys hear me? Oh, there we go. Sorry. Thank you all for being here, and thanks for having me. I'm a lifelong Democrat, not far left. I'm very moderate. From Arizona. I'm not woke. But the way our politics is right now, it's either Trumpism or wokeism, and I don't fall in either category. I feel like the opposite of Trump, the opposite, thank you. The opposite of Trump isn't woke. It's finding a coalition of like-minded Democrats like myself, independents, and normal Republicans like you guys here. And I just want to know, how do we build a coalition? How do we, because I promise you there's a lot more like me out there, because Twitter's not real life. There's more Democrats like me. How do we build a coalition where we fight for common sense Republicans like Congresswoman Cheney and Evan McMullin and the Lisa Murkowskis of the world, while also fighting for people like Tim Ryan and Connor Lamb? How do we get the common sense back? Because that's what our country used to be. And I've already donated to Liz Cheney. It's my first Republican donation. She'll get more, but I mean, how do we come together? Because I'm serious. I work with over 125,000 Democrats that helped get Biden elected, and we're here. I'm very serious when I say I'm worried about where our country is heading, and we've got to get it back. Like, this divorce has got to come back, and we've got to reconcile.
Thanks, man. That's a great question. And there's
Get
actually
involved. I mean, that's it. I mean, you're here. I mean, you're in things like this. I'm from further on the right side, but I even worked with like crazy liberals sometimes too. You have to stop seeing people as this part of this like faceless thing and look at individuals and work with people when you agree with them, and then oppose them when you don't agree with them, but still treat them as individuals and fellow citizens. And you'll be surprised how many opportunities are out there and how many people are right there.
Yeah, and I just want to say it's a great question that this is panel one, and I know like that is a question that is on everyone's mind. There's like panels tomorrow that will focus exactly on that question, so we're going to be unpacking that one in other panels. But I think that's exactly right. I mean, you're here. You're welcome, obviously. We're not like branding you a certain label or branding any of us a certain label. I mean, that's the point of this entire thing, is that we're about the principles. And so I just think it's a good it's a great question, but I think this is part of the answer. Everyone in this room right now, no one asked you at the door who you voted for or what party you were a part of. They just said, hey, we're talking about principles today. If you want to be here and show up, let's talk about it, and let's figure out where we want to go from there. I think it's a good start. Any other thoughts?
I mean, I would just hope that both parties would look at the data and their own self-interest and realize that neither wokeism or Trumpism wins. And both sides should want to compete for your vote, and both sides should care about building a majority that can govern. And increasingly, they've not been behaving that way.
Yeah, I just want to say that, first of all, I'm not a conservative or Republican either, and nobody asked me when they asked me to be on this panel. And shortly before the 2016 election, I wrote a series of essays in which I called for a coalition of all democratic forces, and democratic with a small d, that is. And I think that's what you're talking about. And what I would like to suggest is that the key principle for a coalition of democratic forces is that anything that we don't need to fight about now, we need not to fight about now. And there are any number of issues on which, if you put Greg and me on a panel together, it would be a debate. We have had numerous debate exchanges in various formats over, we've never met in person, I think. And there are a million things we don't agree about, and yet I don't think, he has not said anything here today that gives me a moment's pause, and that's because at some level, for purposes of this conversation, it is not necessary for us to focus on the many things on which we probably disagree, some of which are matters close to our own hearts. There are a million things that, democracy is about prioritization. And it's about, when you decide whether you're in a coalition with somebody, you don't do a giant interview of everything they believe. It is about big themes. And the big theme here is there is a threat to limited self-government by free people domestically and abroad. And sometimes that threat is about military invasion, and sometimes that threat is about corruption, and sometimes that threat is about automaniacal egomania and its attractions to people. But there has to be a place for people of the left, right, and center who who choose to organize their politics around the fundamental right of free people to govern themselves, to make that the thing that they come together around, rather than how they feel about marginal tax rates or abortion or gay marriage or, you know, any of 30,000 other issues that we used to think divided us.
Thanks. Well, that's, I want to keep us on track, but give all of our panelists a round of applause. Thank you. We'll now, yes, welcome to the Catherine. Okay, great, yes, and then we'll just get some time to switch off the stage a bit, and then the next speech will begin. Nobody leave, we're about to do the next speech. Good luck.
No, I'm here now.
All right, everyone. Sorry, our next speaker is about to begin, so we'll take a break right at 11:40. You can still feel free to get out, but the next speaker is about to begin. Let's give it 10:40. We'll start at 10:40.
I feel so constricted.
I don't know how this is going to stay.
You know?
All right.
So constricted.
This isn't going to stay up here.
I don't need it. It's going to fall. No, I should throw it in the audience.
There you go.
I think I might. I'm like, look. I'm going to go, whoa! Like Motley Crue. Oh, this was... How you doing? What's going on? No, man. It's insane right now. I was working till midnight last night. I'm exhausted. Oh, yes. Nice to meet you. Yes. I don't know if I've ever been. I don't know if I've ever run. Yeah, I will. What's your name? Oh my goodness, thank you. God. Thank you. Thank you. You can have a full slate. That's right. Amen, John. Amen. Thank you, man. Thank you, brother. I know you. Yes. We have talked now. I agree, man. Yeah. I assume that people are working about it. I'm not that important. Of course, Max. Yeah.
All right, buddy, I'm going to start rounding them up here at 10:40 right now, and then I'll get you introduced.
Oh, this should be good. This should be good.
All right.
Thank you.
Oh, wherever you want to be. All right. Folks, we're going to get started here in about 1 minute, so if you could please take your seats, and we'll get on with the next speaker. All right. Everybody's got their seat, right? We doing all right this morning? All right, good. My name is Tim Surprise, and I'm here from the great state of Michigan as a volunteer for Principles First. Anybody from Michigan here today? All right, great. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. I have the privilege of introducing another principled leader. He has demonstrated leadership throughout his life by dedicating service to others. In fact, he began by first serving our country in the United States Air Force in an 11-year distinguished career, enlisting and then becoming an officer, a military intelligence officer at that, and went on after that 11-year career to serve the National Security Council and the Secretary of Defense as a consultant, as a contractor, and as an authority on military intelligence and cyber security, an area that's very important to us all today. He continued to demonstrate leadership by serving his country in Congress in the great state of Virginia in the 5th Congressional District. And his leadership journey evolved to perhaps a broader constituency by his family establishing and currently operating 2 craft distilleries. I'll let him do a shameless plug at the end for those 2 distilleries. But perhaps, and I believe this to be true, but perhaps his greatest commitment and the demonstration of his leadership is best illuminated in his current role. And that current role is as a senior staffer and an important member of the United States House Select Committee on the attack on January 5th at our Capitol. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming former U.S. Representative Denver Riggleman.
I would first like to lodge a complaint against the Principles First Foundation for not having bourbon up here for me to drink while I'm talking to you. I mean, what kind of organization is this? It's great to see everybody. First, I don't know if Officer Dunn's in here, but I want to give everybody a round of applause. Officer Harry Dunn in the back there. Sorry to embarrass you, Harry. I can actually get it out the back door tax-free, my brother. You know what I'm saying? It's really great to be here. Also, I want to, I'm sure we have a lot of veterans here. So can I see who's Army in here? Everybody Army in here? Army, oh, my goodness. Anybody Navy in here? Oh, my gosh. Anybody Marine Corps? You understood that sentence. Is there anybody that is actually... What did I miss? I have Army, Marine Corps, Coast Guard. Coast Guard? Was that Army, Coast Guard, Marines, Navies, Air Force? Oh, yeah, I'm Air Force. Yeah, Air Force. Right. I just want to tell everybody as Air Force, for the other services, I'll talk very slowly and use small words so you understand what I'm about to say. That was good. So I'm here today to talk about, honestly, disinformation, but I want to just give my background really quick. I did work in the National Security Agency. There's somebody here right now who's sitting in the front row who understands that I'm an operator, not somebody who really knows ones and zeros, and she was laughing when they said I was a cyber expert. I know you were, Elaine. But when it comes to operations, I've done it for about 2 decades. It started back when I was enlisted. I got to put the first GPS transmitters on C-140 Starlifters. Wow, that's cool, right? After that, I did Operation Provide Promise. I did Operation Support Hope. And then somehow they thought I was barely smart enough to go to college, right? So I got into the University of Virginia. Is there any Wahoos here? Any Wahoos? Hell yeah. So anyway, so I got into the University of Virginia, did okay. I graduated and became an Air Force intelligence officer, right? So, and then after that, it got really crazy because they thought, again, I was just sort of barely smart enough to do some things. So they read me into 300 special access programs that was actually merging tactical and strategic data using air platforms like the F-15s, F-16s, right, and the B-1 bombers, but also NSA data. And that really opened up my eyes to how you merge data and look at data and how you use data to go kill bad guys or to go after bad guys. So it was a hell of a time for me to grow up in, was to learn how individuals use language, dots, and data, right, to influence a battle space. Pretty freaking cool, right? I never thought in a million years that I would be sitting talking to you about what's happened to me in a micro level, how I get attacked. By the way, I've asked a lot of questions. Who here believes in Bigfoot? Anybody? Anybody? I'm so sorry. And I would ask anyone here not to look at Google Images for Bigfoot erotica and Denver Riggleman. I am #1 on Google Images for Bigfoot erotica, if anybody knows that story. I am. I mean, I'm very proud of that. I think, by the way, there was an 8,000% increase in searches on Bigfoot erotica on Pornhub after that actually came out on Twitter. Can you believe? They called it the Riggleman bump. Yeah, it's true. It's true. So that is actually part, though, the disinformation talk, right? The fact is, in my first election, I was writing a book using Bigfoot as a disinformation system and how people believe in Bigfoot, how they actually go on, they spend lots of money, the grift that's involved in Bigfoot expeditions and Bigfoot shows, right, and how there's all these different belief systems. And that book was used against me in disinformation to actually accuse me of being a Bigfoot porn-loving Nazi, right? And then that's pretty amazing, but the thing is it was retweeted, by my opponent's daughter, Olivia Wilde, right? So what happened was that goes over the entire ecosystem, and all of a sudden I'm trending #1 on Twitter worldwide. Thank you very much. I'm parodied on Saturday Night Live. I'm destroyed by Colbert and Kimmel and Fallon, right, on something that's completely made up because it got into the disinformation ecosystem, right? But I won somehow. Maybe it's because people do love Bigfoot and there's some secret Bigfoot erotica sect out there that I should be looking at. But you never want to alienate Bigfoot voters. First lesson, right, when you're running for office. So that happens, right? That happens from a Democrat, and you think, well, it can't get much worse than that, right? I can't get much worse than being accused of Bigfoot porn and like to be a big Bigfoot furry and run around my house screaming and being ridiculous. It can't get much worse than that than being called a pedophile by being attacked, your family being attacked every day on Twitter, right? Or people using that today, Or when I was running, putting up signs with me as an ogre, which they should have probably got a picture of me beforehand, you know what I mean? But, you know, putting up pictures of me as an ogre all the way around Charlottesville, Virginia, right? Or putting a Nazi swastika on my forehead. That's pretty scary stuff, but I won. I didn't think 2 years later that I'd also be accused of being a pedophile. I'd be accused of running a money laundering operation through my distillery for the Democratic Party. I'd be accused of trying to change the sexual orientation of children because I officiated a same-sex wedding. That I would actually be probably the first congressman to be taken out by QAnon folks, right? The first in the middle of 2019, I'm giving a speech after the wedding, and all of a sudden, you know, I see people coming up saying, you betrayed us, and they're wearing a little Q. I didn't know what it was at the time. Even being in disinformation, you don't have time to look at every crazy conspiracy theory on the internet. And what I want to tell you guys is that it's data, right? It's the ability to manipulate an entire disinformation system or an information ecosystem that can change the very way you're looked at. Think about what you guys do, right? You guys have your own people you like to look, your own ecosystems, your own places on Twitter or other places. You'd love to be there because it's like-minded individuals. But I have a question for all of you. What if those like-minded individuals are clinically insane, right? Or what if they're actually leveraging ignorance to make money, a grift, a conspiratorial grift, a weaponized grift? Money turns into violence pretty quickly, depending on how you want to use it. How is it that we can be algorithmically targeted by social media and algorithmically targeted by fundraisers? How is it that they're using the same systems, using math, using algorithmic warfare to sort of spread their filth, that digital chum, across the entire information ecosystem? I get to see all this, right? I've done it all. I've got to see call detail records. I've got to see metadata. I've got to go after bad guys like Soleimani in 2006, 2007, trying to find data and use data, right? I went from dropping bombs on foreheads, right, to actually trying to track people using data. And that is really the arc of my career. Being a congressman in a whiskey distillery was really just a cover, right? Just a cover, right? Even though the whiskey cover isn't bad. And once again, why the hell is it not bourbon up here? I just don't understand. So when you see this, we have this ability now where all of us have to fight. And I do make my points rather quickly, right? Because I want you guys to understand that information is the driver of the 21st century. And I don't know if anybody here is a Hunter Thompson fan, right? At all? Anybody? Hunter Thompson fan, right? Right? I just want to say this right now. The data is the 1 million pound shit hammer of the 21st century. However you want to send it or manipulate it or deal with it, there is no way we can get away from data. There's no way we can get away from social media. There's no way we can get around what we're seeing now in Ukraine. Think about the effectiveness in the home country of Putin. And listen, this was not in my original remarks. Ukraine wasn't going to be in my remarks, right, a few weeks ago when it comes to this. When we're talking about Ukraine, you're talking about Putin saying it's about the denazification of the Ukraine. Well, that's frankly untrue. It's false. But if you go on certain social media sites, you can see Ukrainian pictures, right? People that are posting about it in maybe a coordinated way with maybe Ukrainian people standing there with a Nazi flag. You don't know if it's photoshopped or real. It even could be real, but everybody has their segments of the population that are nuts. Look at the far-right MAGA movement, right? So that's what we're dealing with. So as I'm sitting up here talking to you today, my thought is, what do we do about it? I don't really blame all these individuals or sort of these influencers for taking advantage of a system that's so easy to manipulate. The system is a problem. Yeah. Do I think there's certain individuals that do things or say things to radicalize individuals? Absolutely. I get to see the data for January 6th, and I wish I could tell you about it. Because if I did, you would be more shocked than you can imagine. Because it's in the ones and zeros. It's right there. It doesn't matter about language anymore. It really doesn't. We can say anything. If you think about how people use disinformation or how they influence you, everything's disjointed. It's almost like they want to hit you in the amygdala, right? It's this amygdala storm of things that don't make sense from one day to the next. If you think about January 6th, obviously it was Antifa that did it, right, everybody? It was a false flag, right? What did Matt Gaetz say? They had artificial intelligence facial recognition that showed there were Antifa members that are actually there. Yeah, that is horseshit. That's not, it's just horseshit. The thing is, horseshit sells, right? That's how you raise money, hyperbole, outrage, just saying things that are just not really, they're nonsensical. But if you think about false flag conspiracy theories, because I can go into millions, false flag conspiracy theories I think are the laziest of conspiracy theories. You got to be pretty lazy. You know, fake moon landing, that takes some brains, man, right? Flat Earth, yeah. Then you have other things, right? Right? You have other things. When you look at these type of things like Stop the Steal, you're starting to get a more complex type of issues, right? But false flags, you know, I think Marjorie Taylor Greene believed 9/11 was a false flag, right? And she's very smart. So like a turd. So I guess what I'm saying is this. When you look at now at Truthers, I got a chance to talk to Ray Epps, right? To talk to individuals. Anybody know about the FBI false flag conspiracy theory? I bet everybody in here does, right? We know for a fact, based on data, and I can't tell you how right now, that that's absolutely untrue. Absolutely untrue. And that family has been devastated by these types of rumors and innuendo. It's not just me being parodied on Saturday Night Live with a really bad skit about my love of Bigfoot porn. This is about people who actually have their lives threatened because information has been weaponized. And that's what I want to tell you guys, that now, here in this audience, this incredible gathering, what are you going to do about it? What are we going to do about the system? What is your job when somebody comes up to you and tells you that it's 100% that George Soros, you know, funded Republicans behind the scenes to start the January 6th committee? What do I say to that? What do I say to that? What do I say to somebody calling me the Antichrist or calling my wife the spawn of Satan, right? You know what I tell them? I tell them we're now the most powerful couple in the United States of America. You want to see miracles. You have to sort of hit it with humor, facts, and data. A lot of people said, well, Denver, you can't get angry at these people. Yeah, I guess I can. Because when you get hit from multiple sides enough times, my micro problem becomes a macro problem to everybody else. Because I have a bet. I bet out here somebody has accused you of something that you know is wrong, but somehow they have proof through some other means that you did what you know you didn't do. But no matter what, you can't get over the hump because you can't control the ecosystem because their bullies are bigger than you. If we don't come together and fight digital bullies and physical bullies, we are doomed as a country. We have to fight. I don't want to take a lot of time, but I do want to tell you all this. There are people in this audience I absolutely love that are here for me, that came to see me or that I've worked with. And these are people in this audience that are actually heroes that you'll never hear about, that have served in our armed forces, right? That have served in law enforcement, that have served in government, right? That have done things on companies and businesses that nobody will ever know about. I bet there's things in here, guys, that you have done for other people that nobody will ever know. And I know you're maybe smiling about it right now, that nobody knew about it, but damn it, you want to tell them, but you can't. Because you know what you all are? If you do that, you're a good person. It's okay to be a good person. But it's not okay to back down from a bar fight, especially when those people are wrong. So how do we do it? Humor, a little bit, data, yeah. But you got to do it by standing up and having courage. And I think that's what you're saying to people that are here, is that they do have courage. It really ain't me, right? Guess what I get to do after this? I get to go back to 50 acres on my property where my wife is a master distiller. Think about that frickin' gig, right? My wife and daughters are master distillers. I told her I wanted to start the company for you, and now I don't have to do shit, right? She just says everything. But it's smart. My wife thinks that, oh, he's so amazing. I'm like, make me more whiskey. But as we're going forward, I want everybody to know this. I'm sort of in for the long haul. I'm 51 years old. I don't know how long I have, right? Nobody does. But there's younger people out there that need to know. Cross-check your facts. Always source. Memes are usually not true, right? We are in a new world of memetic warfare and coded language and all these things that people are trying to influence other people with. But when it comes right down to it, when you look at the flat line of this, the very core of why all of this is happening, why people are saying awful things with hyperbole and outrage, and you say it's about power, Denver. It's about people who want to be hold the reins of government. It is all about money. And once we actually figure out where the money comes from, where it goes to, what type of language they use to make it. While they're doing it, we can start to rip apart the fabric of their information ecosystems, and that is my job right now in the January 6th committee, is I'm going to rip apart the fabric of their ecosystems. So, I think I took my 10 to 15 minutes. I don't even know how long I talked because I don't know. Thank you. I appreciate it. You know, you heard the individuals up here. You saw Liz at the beginning. I don't know. I think Adam might be coming down. I am friends with them, right? They are my friends. They are also just really sort of badasses, right, in their own way. They are. And I think, but everybody out here that you're here, how humbling is it that you guys would come, listen to these people, and be there sort of in a way that I can't imagine that you want to fight this fight right now? Why would you want to do this? Because it's the right thing to do. That's it. There's no other reason to do it. No other reason. I'll just end with this. When I officiated a same-sex wedding, I told my wife, I said, it's going to be over in 2 weeks. It'll blow over. I can't imagine this will go any further than that, which tells you guys that maybe I shouldn't be an intelligence officer. But anyway, so I said, there's no way, right? Marines, don't laugh at me, damn it. Don't laugh at me. You know that, you know, we were sitting there at the front, and I'm all proud, like, you know, I'm pretty cool, man. I'm officiating a wedding. I'm not even going to use a script because I'm that awesome. And she's like, you know, you're really not, honey. But let me tell you this. She goes, you are... I'm so proud of you. She goes, you're one of the most amazing men I've ever met. True, true. And she goes, and what you're doing is fantastic, but you need to prepare yourself for something. I'm like, what? You know, the adulation of the crowds? You know? She goes, yeah, you're going to have the shortest political career in Virginia history. I think you just need to know that right now. And I think, she goes, and I'm so proud of you because of that, is that you need to make decisions on what's right. I had somebody tell me you're just an awful politician, right? You're just freaking awful. Yep. Yeah, I sort of am. Because I had somebody tell me, said, Denver, you should have waited to do the gay wedding till the second or third term when you had more power in the committees. Can you imagine picking on what's doing right about a bunch of mouth breathers who want to tell you how to vote and what to do? There is no damn way you should ever do that. You do what's right at the time. And yes, I just said mouth breathers for all you guys out there. So I want to thank everybody. I'm just humbled. I'm not going to take everybody's time. I know you probably all have to go to the bathroom. And that's very important. But I want to end with this. I'm just going to keep going on the data front and see what I can do to help the country, right? And what I ask everybody is just to help all of us, but let me help you too. I have a lot of love for everybody in the crowd, and it's not a weird kind of love, so don't worry. I'm not going to call you afterwards. But I want to tell everybody that everybody here, that we got to support each other. I'm going to go away eventually. We're all going to go away. But if we don't have the ability to deal in a country where policy is based on facts and not on fantasy, we are frickin' doomed. And with that, I end, and thank you all very much.
All right, everyone give one more round of applause to Congressman Riggleman. Thank you so much. If I can go ahead and have the Principles of Faith panel come on up, that would be great. Hi, everyone. My name is Reed Howard, and I'm on the planning committee for the Principles First Summit. So it's so exciting to see you all here and in person. I think our movement has been missing the opportunity to get together in a room and show how much energy there is for principled leadership. And so we're so grateful that you're here with us. So in addition to kind of volunteering with Principles First, I'm a chaplain at Georgetown University. And Georgetown has live-in chaplains that live on campus with the college students from all different faith traditions. And so it's been a tremendous privilege to have faith-based conversations with students of all different religions about meaning and how to build a good life. I'm also the Director of Communications at our Institute of Politics at Georgetown University. And so I'm really looking forward to this conversation about principles in the pulpit and the future of faith in America. I want to start, just to kind of set the stage for our discussion today, by saying that our founders knew that democracy requires virtue and that self-governance was always one generation away from extinction. A generation or two later, President Lincoln's Secretary of State, William Seward, said there is always just enough virtue in this republic to save it, sometimes none to spare, but still enough to meet the emergency. And I feel like that is very accurate for this moment as well. So we're in an era in which moral leadership is needed to rebuild trust in democracy and our frayed social contract. The task of moral reparation requires thoughtful leaders who possess the integrity, courage, and imagination to lead this change. That's why I'm so excited for our panel's discussion today. I'm going to briefly introduce each of our panelists and then turn it over to them for opening remarks. So Peter Weiner is a senior fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. He's a contributing opinion writer for the New York Times and a contributing editor for the Atlantic magazine. Mr. Weiner served in the Reagan, George H.W. Bush, and George W. Bush administrations. Elizabeth Newman served as the Deputy Chief of Staff to Secretary Kelly, an Assistant Secretary for Counterterrorism and Threat Prevention at the Department of Homeland Security under the Trump administration. While there, she was a passionate advocate for growing the department's ability to respond to emerging threats like violent white supremacist extremism and malign foreign influence. And Nap Nasworth is the executive director of the American Values Coalition, a nonprofit combating right-wing extremism and misinformation. He left his job of nearly 9 years as the politics editor at the Christian Post after they published an editorial positioning them on Team Trump. He has been an assistant professor and lecturer and received his 2006 PhD in political science from the University of Florida, specializing in the study of religion and politics. So you'll please join me in welcoming our panelists. Elizabeth, we'll start with you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me. I want to start out with like a little acknowledgement that I appreciate that there are probably lots of faith traditions in this room. And when we get to the Q&A and talk about faith more broadly, I certainly will strive to represent that. That said, I want to share a little bit about my faith background and get a little personal, because I think that it's just easier to be transparent about that, to see how that has informed some of the points I want to bring to your attention today. So I was raised an evangelical Christian. My parents were Christian, their parents were Christian. My mom was going to K. Arthur Bible studies when she was pregnant with me. If anybody knows what that is, that's a really in-depth Bible study. I went to a Christian school. Despite some rebellious periods in my teens and early 20s, I never doubted my faith. I do pinpoint 2007, when I not only saw Jesus as my Savior, but he was also my Lord, and I submitted to him. And right after that transition point, spent a lot of time diving into the Bible, doing in-depth Bible studies, going on mission trips, being very involved in my faith community. So, despite all of that, on election night 2012, I was utterly devastated. Like, not my team lost, not I put a lot of hard work into the campaign. I actually hadn't. I wasn't living in D.C. at the time. But I thought my world was coming to an end. I had believed the political narratives that the country as we knew it would never be the same if Obama was elected for a second term. I had believed narratives that I'd heard from pulpits that we would not be allowed to worship freely, that pastors in our lifetime were going to end up in jail for just preaching the Bible. When my family and I moved to Dallas in 2015, we started attending a church which indirectly began to challenge some of those conservative political teachings that I thought came from Scripture. And that kind of started a journey for my husband and me. We were wrestling with the realization that what we were reading in Scripture didn't actually match our political stances and our policies. So when I think about this theme of principles in the pulpit, it's very personal to me. Over the past 4 or 5 years, especially the last 2 years, we've lost friends and had family relationships strained, families relationships that were grounded in Scripture. So I'd like to offer some humble suggestions based on my own journey. And I kind of boil these down to suggestions for political movements like this group, suggestions for pastors and church leaders, and suggestions for Christians. So for political movements, please do not make the same mistakes that the GOP did. Co-opting faith communities for power leaves both groups power hungry and morally bankrupt. Faith should inform our politics, not the other way around. For pastors, I esteem your very important role. Please get out of politics. I really do appreciate that in order to winsomely teach, you need to understand the culture, but many of you have decided that being a culture warrior is more important than being a follower of Jesus. Please faithfully teach the Scripture, foster healthy communities where people can grow safely, and grow to be people of integrity. If you take the second principle in Principles First, every person has dignity, quality, and worth. That is found throughout the Scripture from Genesis to Revelation. And yet, if you were to ask the average evangelical Christian, they would seem to think that that only applies in the context of abortion. Teaching the Scriptures leads to people of integrity, people not easily deceived and persuaded by fear. Last, if you are a Christian, it's lonely and long work to untangle your faith from politics. You need healthy community. Isolation is a tool of the enemy. And after the last 2 years, we all are struggling with isolation. Please find safe, biblically grounded community and commit to it. Make a daily practice of putting your hope in Christ alone. That doesn't mean we don't care about flourishing of society, but put first things first. Our hope is not in this world. It helps you from being overtaken by fear and the thirst for power if you keep your grounding and hope in Christ. Get comfortable with the fact that we are in a post-Christian culture. Depending on where you live, that shift may have occurred a long time ago or might just be changing now. But as people of faith, we are increasingly going to be the minority and at times targets of ridicule and persecution. Jesus promised his disciples they would be persecuted, and he responded to that with, "Take heart, I have overcome the world." Do we believe that? We can grieve the change. We can be grateful for the legacy of faith in this country, also acknowledge its many failures too, but the goal is not to reclaim the past. It's time to construct new communities, new institutions. And finally, if you do feel called to contribute to political movements like this one, that's awesome. I mean, I've spent most of my life in and around politics. But your priority needs to first be finding that healthy biblical community. This cannot be your only community. You need to be grounded in truth that is deeper than a political movement. That grounding will help you to resist the temptations of seeking power for power's sake, and it also helps you properly understand and examine policy through the lens of serving others and seeking the common good. People of faith can and should be involved in politics, but let's start from that motivation of the second greatest commandment, to love our neighbor as ourselves.
Thanks, Elizabeth. So my personal background, I'm an evangelical Christian and lifelong conservative, and before Trump, I was a Republican my whole life. And one of the things when I was thinking about this faith and politics panel, I began thinking about how much what's taking place, what we're discussing this weekend at Principles First, how much these debates, how these divisions within conservatism overlap with things that are taking place within churches in America today. And oftentimes what's happening in churches and what's happening in the conservative movement today. They influence each other. They overlap in lots of ways. So I'll just for one example, there was the Me Too movement that highlighted a lot of sexual abuse, reaction in part to the election of Trump, but also Hollywood and lots of other places where this was taking place. After the Me Too movement, that was followed closely by the Church Too movement. And the Church Too movement highlighted sexual abuse within churches. And so that's just one example about how these things were influencing each other. Another example would be debates today over critical race theory. There's a church element that's taking place at the same time that there's a politics element that's taking place. So what I found over the past 5 years or so, that I've seen lots of politicians, Republicans, who I once admired, as well as theologians and Christian leaders who I once admired, they don't have the integrity that I thought they had. And I've seen what has been revealed to us in the last 4 or 5 years is, broadly speaking, an abuse of power. You see the abuse of power within churches, and you see it among politicians as well. And again, these are influencing each other. So what we're trying to do at the American Values Coalition is, we're deeply concerned about the degree to which people like me, Christians, conservatives, are being misled and being radicalized by right-wing media sources today. In some cases, the pastors are the problem and are doing the misleading. But more often than not, the pastors in churches across the country today, that the division that's being caused by right-wing media sources is impacting their congregations. It's dividing the people in their flock, and they're deeply concerned about it, and they're not sure, they're struggling with what to do about this. If I could just get an idea from the audience today, how many of you personally know a friend or a family member who believes conspiracy theories or misinformation about vaccines or misinformation about the election? Oh my gosh, that's almost everyone. Yeah. So so what we want to do at the American Values Coalition is we want to bring those people back to reality. But the way that we're going to have to do that is through you. It's because you're the people who know them. You and people like you who know these people, because really what it's going to take is relationships. It's going to take loving that person. It's going to take empathy. It's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of energy and resources in order to reach these people who are no longer based in reality because of right-wing media sources. And honestly, one of the biggest problems today, biggest sources of misinformation, is Tucker Carlson, because of the size of his audience. And I want to say that in particular because I know that Fox Nation is live streaming this. Hi, Fox Nation. Yeah. So. And Fox Nation, they have a Tucker Carlson special on that website that completely misleads people about what happened on January 6th. And it's radicalizing people. I'm really concerned about what's going to happen because of the misinformation that's taking place on places like Fox Nation, right? So, this has become a serious problem. We need to figure out what to do about it, but we need to, reach the people that are being radicalized in these sorts of ways. One last point I wanted to make about Principles First. I remember, I think maybe it was 3 years ago, that Heath Mayo came down to one of our Principles First meetings in Austin, Texas, and we were talking about we're still trying to develop the principles that we came up with for Principles First, right? And I remember one of them that we talked about was what eventually became Principle 2. Every person has dignity, quality, and worth, right? So, and correct me if I'm wrong for anyone who's there, but I think it was pretty much universal that needs to be like one of the core principles. And, we ended up putting it as the second principle. So a lot of what you see on the MAGA right today is just such a complete violation of that principle. Because what you see, they are not treating immigrants and refugees as people with dignity and worth, right? I didn't even have to say please clap for that. Yeah. So and also on racism is such a problem on the MAGA right today. I'm all for big tents and having a diversity of viewpoints and so forth, but if you find yourself in coalition with white supremacists, it's time to leave that coalition, right? So for the people watching on Fox Nation, this may be, it's fine. No, let's, this may be the first time you're hearing about us, right? Maybe you didn't know, there's another conservatism out there, right? That's different than what's taking place at CPAC. And maybe you're sort of having doubts about what's happening within the world of conservatism today. Please, I just want you to know that you have a home here, right? With American Values Coalition, with Principles First, join us, help us. Thank you.
Thanks. It's great to be with you. Thanks, Nap and Elizabeth and Reed for being part of this panel, and to you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here. You're in a minority movement right now, but that's okay. I learned early in life from people wiser than me that in life you're called to be faithful, not successful. We'd all rather be both, but faithful is more important than being successful. And sometimes when you're faithful, life reaches inflection points, and all of a sudden things change and you can become successful. But I do appreciate the fact that all of you are faithful to causes that you care about in a country that you love. Just briefly, because we want to have some time for conversations, a few thoughts. I've been asked probably more than any other question, I would say, over the last 5 years, how could people of faith, particularly the Christian faith, have rallied the way they did for Donald Trump? I think I get that question because I'm a person of the Christian faith and have been, fairly upfront about that. And it's I think the puzzlement that I've heard from people isn't that people voted for Trump, which I didn't do, but I understand that argument. It's that they rallied for him, that they were his sword and his shield, that they were sort of energized for him. And that just seemed a huge cognitive dissonance to people on the outside watching it. And the reason it seemed that way is it is. It was a huge act of hypocrisy and double standards. And so the question becomes, well, what happened? What explains that? And I think several things that I'll throw out, and we can maybe talk about them as the panel unfolds. One is that I think people lost sight of what the purpose of faith and the church is in American political life. Martin Luther King had a lovely line that I thought explained it. He said that the church shouldn't be a servant or a master of the state, but the conscience of the state. And King himself was actually a great, I think, embodiment of how that worked, of how he traversed what can be a very tricky landscape of using faith as a means to justice without having it corrupted by faith. I'd say this generation, this moment, it's much worse than that. And what has happened is that faith, for a lot of people, not all people by any means, but for a lot of people, particularly white evangelicals, the church and faith has become a servant to a cause, and that cause is Donald Trump and MAGA world. And Congressman Riegelman used the phrase information weaponization earlier in his speech. I would say that faith has been weaponized in our time. Now, this is not new. Anybody that's familiar with the history of faith and certainly the Christian church knows that this happens from time to time. But we can't answer for history. We can't answer for the here and the now and for who we are and for our moment. And there's no question in my mind that faith has become a kind of club, something that's weaponized to beat up other people and to beat them up if they're on the other side, as long as they're not on your side. It's been instrumentalized, a means to an end. C.S. Lewis in the Screwtape Letter, some of you may be familiar with that, it's a fantastic book, but the conceit behind the book is that there's a senior devil writing to a younger devil trying to give him advice on how they can then win the day. And the older devil says to the younger devil that once you get people of faith to believe that the world is their ends and faith is the means to the end, then you've just about won your man. And that is what is happening. In my experience, because I have a lot of friends who are people of faith, who view politics differently than I do and are varying degrees of Trump supporters, and just my own observations, what I think has happened is that faith has been subordinated in ways that they don't fully understand. And frankly, in a way that when I started my Christian journey, I wouldn't have expected. My understanding, or I guess my observation of this, is what is core to a lot of people of faith right now is sociology, is culture, is partisanship. And faith is subordinated to that. But the arguments that are made are wrapped with a ribbon and a bow of faith. And so you're having, in a sense, a shadow debate. You think you're talking about faith when actually what it is faith has been subordinated and instrumentalized to advance some other cause that they care even more deeply about. They wouldn't say that, by the way. I mean, I think if you gave sodium pentothal, they would say, no, I think this is what I'm called as a Christian, as a follower of Jesus, a person who reads the Bible. This is where it is. This is what I'm called to be and to do. This should be a warning for all of us. We're all susceptible to this. Confirmation bias, motivated reasoning. We all think that we come at these things at the right angle of vision, and the people who disagree with us are the ones who are off. And we should all be very, very aware of how much our culture influences. Even Elizabeth, your own story about how you were able to see things anew because you had grown up in a certain culture and environment, and you thought this is the way it is. So, to her credit, she was open to listening and changing. In terms of understanding what's going on, I'd say there are several things. Here, I want to be fair to the people with whom I disagree with. So, if I were to say, what is it that's driving the people in the faith community that have ended up in a place very different than mine? One is, I think there is an extraordinary fear, really an existential fear of this moment. They believe that we're, 2 minutes or 30 seconds from midnight, that the left is all powerful, all malicious, all malevolent. They want to destroy you and your children and your country, and they're on the edge of doing it. And this thing is being repeated all the time in this echo chamber. When you get into that mindset, when you're seized by existential fear, there's an awful lot you will tolerate on your side if you think that your side is going to fight off these attacks that are going to destroy you and your country. I think that those fears are often dramatically overstated, not always invented out of whole cloth. There are real concerns, but I think they're dramatically overstated. And I think there are people who, for financial reasons, they just make a lot of money by fanning these fans of fear. The second thing is, in my experience, it's a sense of grievances, deep grievances and resentments, the feeling that they've been mocked and ridiculed by the elite culture for decades, and they're just sick and tired of it. And so when Donald Trump came along, they thought, he's a nasty piece of work, and he's vicious, but he's bringing a gun to a knife fight, and I want somebody to do that because I'm sick and tired about how I've been treated. So that's the second thing. And the third is one I alluded to, which is a sort of core identity that people are bringing into this faith experience. You know, if you're a person in the South, I was born in Dallas, you know that there are pockets in the South. There's a kind of Southern cultural identity, an honor and shame culture. And if you can take that honor and shame culture and envelop it with faith, it can turn you into a pretty problematic direction. I'm very fond of the South. There are a lot of people, obviously, who are faithful Christians, but there are regions of the country that have culture. There are culture is shaped in all sorts of different ways, and so I think there is a kind of core identity, and that's why, by the way, if you're having a discussion with people on an issue sometimes, and you think, why is this a particularly intense debate over some issue that we may disagree with? Often the answer is that it's a shadow debate, that those issues are actually attached to some core identity. And when people feel like, and when we feel like our core identity is under attack, that elicits in us a very strong response. So it's always worth keeping in mind when you have dialogue or discussions or debate with people and it seems particularly intense, just to keep in mind that often these people feel like they're under attack, or that we feel like we're under attack, and you have to approach that. What to do about it? I'm just going to take 2 minutes here. I would say that the first thing to do is really the most obvious thing as a person of faith, which is I think a lot of us have wandered away from our first love, and our hearts haven't been transformed. I've come to believe now, as I've gotten older in my journey in the Christian faith, that if you get religious institutions without transformed hearts, you don't get a lot, and often you get something worse than you would have had otherwise, because these kind of institutions can become instruments of power and oppression as well. The other thing is, in my experience, and I was thinking about this with, I think this sounds like it happened with Elizabeth, which is, in the end, you know, how does this change? I put an awful lot of weight on relationships, the importance of the integrity of relationships. The one thing you have found, or if you're young, you will find, is that you're not going to change somebody's opinion on deeply held opinions by marshaling an array of facts and trying to overwhelm them, or trying to make them feel shamed by their positions, or if you think that, well, my position isn't being heard, so I'm going to increase the volume, as if, you know, yelling at them is going to turn. That's not how it works. How it works is when people within your own life, or whom you know, who trust you, who feel like that you have their best interest at stake, has a different view, then you can engage in a genuine conversation that begins to open, I would say, some doors that would otherwise be closed. You know, that's hard work, but that's the work of what it means to be people of faith and to be human beings, which is, you know, we're responsible for the communities we're a part of and the relationships that we have. And the last thing is, it's one of my favorite lines in poetry. It's from The Prelude by Wordsworth. It's an endlessly long poem, but there's a line in there which I love, and he said, "What we have loved, others will love, and we will teach them how." And I think for people of faith, that's a very nice way of thinking about it, which is if you love the right things, and you can teach other people to love them too, and in the end, you can elevate rather than denigrate and degrade things. And we live in a time in which, Lord knows, we need to elevate things. So thanks a lot, and we'll have a conversation.
So, as we get into our questions and discussion here, I just wanted to give a programming note. Heath and I, when we were thinking about how to structure this panel, wanted to get an evangelical perspective up here. I think many of you in the audience can say, how are you going to have a panel on faith and only have evangelicals at the table? And when we were designing this conference and thinking about who was invited, we asked people of different faith traditions to be on all different panels throughout the course of this weekend. When we think about principles in the pulpit, there's a particular tradition where there's been a lack of principles. And that's why we wanted to bring in experts who could talk about it as it relates to the evangelical tradition. And so we have a coalition panel that's happening tomorrow, and we have speakers of different faith traditions throughout the weekend. And I just think that's really important to note. Pete, I want to start my questions with you. In October of 2021, you wrote an article in The Atlantic titled "The Evangelical Church is Breaking Apart." And I'll read an excerpt for our audience. You said, "When the Christian faith is politicized, churches become repositories not of grace but of grievances, places where tribal identities are reinforced, where fears are nurtured, and where aggression and nastiness are sacralized." So, Pete, how is evangelical political engagement affecting the church's broader and primary mission of evangelism? And what can we do in our own faith communities to plant seeds to change this?
Yeah, it's a great question, Reed. In terms of how is it affecting the broader primary mission of evangelicalism, I think it's having a devastating effect. Just because I am a person of the Christian faith, the most personally painful thing about the last half dozen years has been the tremendous damage, I think, to the Christian witness and to the Christian church. About 2 years ago, I was visiting a place where I grew up, Richland, Washington, and I was having a conversation with a fellow, Carl Kopic, who was a pastor. He had been instrumental, actually, in my own journey of faith when I was a young man. And I was asking him about what was going on, and I remember it when he told me, he said, "Pete, what's happening is a generational catastrophe." I think what is most harmful are to younger people of the Christian faith who are looking up at what they're seeing and think, this is a moral freak show. What the hell is going on? I don't want anything I don't want to be a part of this, if this is what it means, the anger, the grievance, the hypocrisy, and all the rest. And I was struck at one point. I thought, if you were an atheist and a liberal, and you thought, what could I do to discredit the evangelical witness in America? You would probably go into a lab and build somebody that looked very much like Donald J. Trump and say, we're going to have him win the Republican nomination, and we're going to have the social conservative Christians rally behind him and defend him. That would do a great job to advance the cause of atheism. If it happened, and it has, and I think if you have conversations with people of the Christian faith, as well as people of the non-Christian faith, it's had a huge and devastating effect. I do think that the younger generation, in my conversations and conversations I've had with people who are in ministry with young people, is in a lot of cases they're not leaving the faith, but they're leaving the institutional church. Or they're no longer referred to themselves as evangelicals, and they are looking for something. And I think, in that line, if you build it, they will come. I do think that if people of faith can live authentic lives of faith and show how their lives are transformed in a way that's attractive, that makes them better, and live lives of fulfillment and meaning and joy, and even joy in the midst of pain and sorrow. You think about your own experiences with folks, who are Christian, and normally, and this is true of when non-Christians witness it too. If they're able to see how faith is changing lives in an elevated and joyous way, that is a huge difference. And the last thing I'll say is grace. I think the one thing that I've experienced in life that people of faith can access, I think, more readily than not people not of faith. It's not inaccessible. I think it's more accessible. It's when people see the living embodiment of grace in people's lives. And I've had conversations with friends of mine who are not Christians, including atheists. And when I've shown them things, manifestations of grace in people's lives, that's the one thing that tends to break through, and they think, I may not be there, but this is something I wish I had.
Thank you. All right, so Elizabeth, I'll come to you next. In July of 2017, Pew Research Center reported that 72% of white evangelicals believed that Islam and democracy were in conflict. Just a few weeks before the 2016 election, 2/3 or 66% of white evangelical Protestants said that the growing number of newcomers from other countries threatened traditional American customs and values. And 63% said that today discrimination against whites had become just as big a problem as discrimination against blacks and other minorities. These poll results show an embattled white group worried about the forces of cultural change around them. What can we do as a movement to dislodge this unnatural pairing of evangelicals with populism and conservative nationalism? And if I can add a second part to this, you're an expert on national security. To what extent are these attitudes a threat to national security?
Well, I'll take the last one first. They
Okay.
are extremely dangerous. We've already seen that manifest in the last year. Let me add to your stats there. There was a series of polls run by different groups over the last year. And depending on the one that you take and the time point you take it, the estimates are there are between 10 million and 30 million Americans who believe that violence is justified at times to achieve their political ends. By the way, that meets the definition of terrorism. There are 18,000 law enforcement agencies in this country. There are 800,000 sworn law enforcement officers. We don't have enough security to deal with 30 million potentially violent people. Also, the way that the laws are written, and I am supportive of the way that the laws are written, we can't go after terrorism inside the United States the way we can overseas. Now, separate conversation, I think we could change the laws in a way that's respectful of our Constitution, and I hope that we can do that. But today, with a potential pool of people interested in violence being at 30 million, we have a pretty catastrophic boiling point that we are sitting on. When we look at the concept of extremism, we know that, and let me define my terms here. In the security community, we talk about people that are vulnerable to being radicalized. These are people that have risk factors or life stressors that make them open to certain narratives, feeding grievances, and they can be moved to a radicalized state. Then you have the number of people that are radicalized at any given moment is going to be less than the number of vulnerable. Does that make sense? So large pool of vulnerable, smaller pool of radicalized. The people that mobilize to violence, very, very, very small. You know, we don't actually know the percentage, but 0.5%, 1%, 2%, very, very small. The problem, though, is that a small percent of a very large whole is still a very big number. And we can't predict. We've studied radicalization in depth for about 20 years since 9/11. We still don't have a good handle on who's going to be that one person that today is the day that they go mobilize. Mobilization and the movement to violence is happening faster. The social media companies, the online component of radicalization is a huge factor of that. So my day job, I think about that. I work on prevention strategies. And it was a thing we were greatly concerned about in 2019. It got a whole lot harder after 2020. J.M. Berger defines extremism as the belief that an in-group success or survival can never be separated from the need for hostile action against the outgroup. So if you think about what Pete was just talking about, the current political moment where you have a narrative almost 24/7 on certain news stations perpetuating this existential fear, this existential threat that we're facing. You basically have in those news stations radicalization narratives. Now, some people are not vulnerable, so that it doesn't affect them that way. Some people are vulnerable, but maybe they have some resilience factors in their lives, so they don't ever move to that radicalization space. But a whole lot of people have been radicalized, especially over the last 10 years. Facebook algorithmics, we now know through some leaked documents, you literally can set up a profile, not touch it, and within a week, your feed, depending on your demographics, your feed would be filled with QAnon conspiracy theories. Even though you had posted nothing, you had liked nothing. The algorithms are predisposed to feed you the conspiracies. So you got to think about the vulnerable. Like, they have no chance. Like, I feel a tremendous empathy for them. Like, they don't know that they're being deceived. And I totally agree with Denver. It's for money. Fox News could fix this. Facebook could fix this. It's for money. And then there's another driver here. It's power. So what do we do about it? You kind of have to take the groups differently. The way you approach vulnerable or somebody that's radicalization curious is different than how you approach a radicalized individual. Pete mentioned it. You're not going to argue a radicalized individual out of their ideology. Not going to work. In fact, take it out of the context of politics, but in the context of extremists, violent extremists, when you talk to people that have been involved in neo-Nazi gangs or were formerly Islamist jihadist, those that have de-radicalized, what they tell us is that it was through relationships. It was through somebody coming alongside and addressing other psychosocial needs. It's not the ideology, folks. So if they're truly radicalized, they need help. It's probably not something a layperson can do, but you can be a friend, especially if it's a family member. You can still love. You set healthy boundaries. Don't put yourself in harm's way, but you can still love. If you see that person playing with things that are potentially violent, call the police. Get attention. Get somebody's attention so that they get the help they need, and hopefully they don't do anything criminal. But the vulnerable, and that's where the work that AVC is doing, that's where groups like that's really important. It's important for us to offer counter messaging. It's important for us to be winsome in how we do that. We don't want to yell or make fun of them. Have empathy. Like, it's not their fault that Fox News and Facebook and these things that are just 24/7 narratives of grievance and radicalization pathways. So let's befriend and be kind and be winsome, but it does take courage because you will get pushback. So I'll stop with that.
Thank you. I'm getting the signal from the back to wrap things up. So Nap, I will let you close us out. When it comes to principles in the pulpit, what's something that we all should take away, and what's something maybe that your organization is doing that you want to let us know about?
Take away, I have hard copies of our Truth Advocates Handbook. Please take it away because I don't want to bring it back on the airplane. So, all right, well, let me end with this. So something I alluded to in my opening remarks is that there is a split taking place that's similar to the split within conservatism that's taking place within evangelicalism. And so there are evangelicals who value pluralism, who object to coalitions with white supremacists, and who want to treat immigrants, for instance, and refugees with dignity and respect, who push back when the Trump administration used separating children from their parents as a political tool. That was child abuse, all right? And so there were evangelicals who were pushing back against that. So, there are some indications, that I don't know where this is going to lead, but like I said, there's something similar that's happening, within conservatism, within churches that I'm involved in. And so I think it's just important for all of us to, first and foremost, put truth first. to always be advocates for truth, even when it's hard, even when it's difficult, even when it's a difficult conversation that you need to have with somebody. Make sure your search for truth comes first.
All right, thank you so much for being here, and thank you all for being here.
All right, hi everyone. My name is Dylan. I'm with the National Grassroots Committee of Country First. Just a quick announcement about lunch. We have food trucks outside for your convenience, but please bring your masks and lanyards with you because you will need that to get back into the building. And also the National Press Club does not allow you to bring outside food back in the building, so just a heads up. And we will be reconvening here back at 12:45, so please be back at 12:45 p.m. Thank you so much.